Good evening. There are bodies scattered all over the place. There were at least 51 people on the jetliner headed from Mexico City to Los Angeles.
We knew we were going to die.
Authorities still are trying to determine just what happened when an airliner and a small plane collided over Southern California, killing all on board and an undetermined number in the neighborhood where the planes crashed.
That was the chilling report from Cerritos, California.
It's a mess here. To at the crash scene now, there's multiple residential homes involved in a fire. There's body parts all over the street.
Started screaming, oh my God, fear, death. I didn't know. I just knew people were dead. I just knew that the neighborhood was in a lot of trouble.
One eyewitness, unconfirmed on the ground, said that this plane was slammed into the midsection or the wing section of the jet, splitting it into, sending the small plane to the ground like a toy glider. The big plane in sections landing in that neighborhood you saw a moment ago and exploding on impact.
To at the crash scene now, there's multiple residential homes involved in a fire. There's body parts all over the street.
Growing up in Cerritos was kind of like the quintessential 1980s middle-class suburbia upbringing.
It's such a quiet city and quiet neighborhood.
I have a lot of really great memories. It brings back a lot of nostalgia.
Everybody kind of knows each other and kind of grow up with each other.
I remember my brother and I just riding around the neighborhood with our neighborhood friends. We would ride to Thrifties.
Rode our bikes there to eat ice cream.
I would always get a scoop of rainbow sherbet. My brother would always get mint chocolate chip. And at that time, a scoop of Thrifties ice cream was like 35 cents.
You know, my parents always left us alone. You know, they stayed home while we just went wherever.
But I loved growing up in Cerritos. I loved the childhood. I loved that there was a good community, really good schools. Everything was very organized. And I can't really imagine my childhood anywhere else. It was August 31st, 1986, Labor Day weekend. Everybody always describes that day as sort of the Chamber of Commerce Southern California Day. That's how we remember that weekend. Just a very sunny, quiet, beautiful day.
Oh boy, 36 years ago, to me, just like happened like not too long ago.
My dad had just returned from Canada. He took my grandma, his mom, to the World Expo 1986. So they had just returned from that trip, and so, it was kind of a low-key weekend for us. Some people were out of town.
My mom was kind of tired, and she was stay home. And then me, Kathy, and my two kids, we went to about a mile and a half away in the Toys R Us store.
Now, I remember we were going to buy something.
We went to exchange or return something, right?
My parents think we were returning something or exchanging something, but I was never going to pass up an opportunity to go to Toys R Us. That is just something that we did. And so I went with my parents and my brother kind of running around town, running errands.
Good morning, this is Aeroméxico 498. We are leaving.
And as we were just kind of going about a typical weekend running errands around town, there was an Aeroméxico DC-9 flight 498 that was making its descent to LAX from Mexico City.
Mexico 498, Los Angeles, departure beach 320, right Alex 125 left final approach course. Do you have information uniform?
There were 58 passengers on board and 6 crew members.
Grumman 66 Romeo squawk 4524, remain clear of the TCA.
At the same time, the Kramer family, they were getting ready to spend a few days at Big Bear. So around that same time, they get to Torrance Airport. They take off on their little Piper Archer plane, headed to Big Bear to spend a few days over there.
Grumman 66 Romeo, you at 4,500 now?
For some reason, and we still don't know exactly why, but William Kramer, who was piloting that Piper, he deviated off his original flight plan that he had submitted for this trip. There was some speculation that heart disease ran in the Kramer family and that perhaps he had suffered a medical emergency.
Okay, you're right in the middle of the TCA, sir. Grumman 66 Romeo. I would suggest in the future you look at your TCA chart.
He ended up in what's called LAX's TCA, Terminal Control Area.
You just had an aircraft pass right off to your left above you at 5,000, and we've run a lot of jets through there right at 3,500.
He was in a restricted airspace that a small Piper plane like that should not have been in.
What do you suggest I do now?
That particular area is off limits to small planes like William Kramer's Piper. But for some reason, he ended up diverting off of his flight plan and entering into this restricted airspace.
Aeroméxico 498, turn left heading 280.
For several agonizing moments, air traffic control did not have sight of Flight 498.
Aeroméxico 498, turn left heading 280.
It was silent.
Grumman 66 Romeo, stand by. Aeroméxico 498, turn left heading 280, over.
It was nowhere on their radar.
Aeroméxico 498, Los Angeles approach.
That's when the mid-air collision happened.
Aeroméxico 498, Los Angeles approach.
William Kramer and his Piper Archer plane clipped the tail end of that Aeroméxico DC-9. It sent both of the planes spiraling down pretty much in nosedive fashion into our neighborhood of Cerritos. And when I say nosedive, I mean that Aeroméxico DC-9 went straight down into the neighborhood.
So when we come out from the store, we hear a big bang, right? We don't know what's going on.
After we got out of the store, I have very vivid memories of coming down 183rd Street.
I heard some accident in Cerritos, but we don't know what is detail because my radio is on the car all the time.
My parents always had the news on. I think it was my dad's Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme at the time.
KNX 1070 News Radio.
And they had talked about an airplane crash in Cerritos.
NBC Nightly News, reported by Chris Wallace.
Good evening. There are bodies scattered all over the place. That was the chilling report from Cerritos, California, after an Aeroméxico DC-9 collided with a small plane. There were at least 51 people on the jetliner headed from Mexico City to Los Angeles. And late today, Aeroméxico said there may have been even more passengers than that on the plane. There were 3 people on the other small plane.
I saw a plume of smoke. And of course, as a kid, you're kind of like, what's going on, you know? And as we got closer and closer, we really quickly realized that's our neighborhood.
Oh my God, we see the boom and the smoke. So we drive the car around the 183rd toward the smoke. The more closer, the more scary, because that is look like our lot here, right?
The exact death toll on the ground will not be known for some time.
You know, that day was really a darkest day in Cerritos.
Authorities now believe at least 5 people died in their homes, but the ruins have not been thoroughly searched as of yet.
And it was concerning, right? As a kid, you're scared because you don't know what's going on, but it was also concerning because my dad was really freaking out. My grandma was home alone at the time.
My mom's still in the house.
I knew that he was so worried about his mom, my grandma. In Chinese, we call her Nai Nai.
Oh my God, my heart's beating so bad.
Of course, at that time, there were no cell phones, no social media, and so we really didn't know what was going on. It was just that little blip on the radio that there was a plane crash.
And we are hearing reports that some people on the ground may also have been injured.
And so we were really worried about my grandma because she was home at the time alone.
It's a mess here. I'm at the crash scene now. There's multiple residential homes involved in a fire. There's body parts all over the street. If you can have fire units respond to homes and Carnaby.
The police already blocked the Caminito Road northbound. So we have to go to south, go to La Palma Avenue and turn on the south side of the house.
I very specifically remember my dad driving around frantically trying to figure out where to park and how to get in.
Flaming wreckage and bodies were strewn over an area of several blocks. One sheriff's deputy described the scene as pandemonium.
And so we parked at a bank parking lot a mile from our neighborhood, and we were just running.
Let me tell you, that's the hardest ran in my life.
You know, my dad was super panicked. I was just trying to keep up with him with my little legs, and I just still had no idea what was going on.
I ran, my heart was beating, and then we passed the Cerritos Elementary School, right? And I saw the little Pipers lay on the background.
The small plane, a Piper Tomahawk with 3 people on board, glided down, according to one eyewitness, like a toy glider, and then crashed into the schoolyard. There were no survivors.
We passed by my elementary school, Cerritos Elementary, and I very distinctly remember seeing this small plane. And I thought, oh, that's weird. A small plane is in our schoolyard. And at that point, I still didn't really realize the enormity of it.
So the kids, of course, they were so scared.
The horrifying thought that at this point, authorities still do not know for sure how many of the individuals living here on the ground were killed when the planes came down.
So I keep running, until I hit the canopy and look on the west side. And then I know our house is safe, but I don't know about my mom, right? When I open my door, my mom is still shaking. Ooh, man. Shaking. She says she heard a big bang, bang.
And I can picture her face. You know, she was very, very scared. She thought it was an earthquake. The sound was so loud, and it shook the earth.
When we got home, we gave Nai a big hug because she was still in the state of scary. But we told her we are safe, because she came from Taiwan all the way visit us.
She's not from this country, and you know, we thought that we were just going, you know, on a quick errand, right, to Toys R Us, and then this happened.
I cry and I say, thanks God, Ma, you still okay.
She witnessed the terrible scene.
The wreckage everywhere. The bodies of the passengers and crew scattered in pieces, burned beyond recognition.
And let me tell you, something happened like that to my neighborhood and to the community is a big shock.
A piece of the Mexican jetliner's tail section was visible sticking out of the roof of one of the houses.
Imagine it, if this happened right now. It destroyed several homes, it killed 15 people on the ground, all 58 passengers, all 6 crew members, as well as the entire Kramer family, William, his wife, and their daughter Caroline. They all died. There were no survivors. We actually arrived in the neighborhood even before the police barricades went up.
Emergency crews arrived in minutes. Most of their time was spent fighting fires. There were few injuries, they said. Everyone near the crash was probably killed.
One of those first responders who arrived in our neighborhood the moment it happened was retired La Palma officer David Lang.
I had gotten home. I'd been out, it was a pretty day, and taken my kids out. And we got home and I got a telephone call from a friend of mine. He said, "You hear about the plane crash? Cerritos and La Palma, it's right on the border." I said, "Nope." So I called my agency and they were swamped. They couldn't even talk with me. So I decided I need to go in. So I got here probably to the agency about 30 minutes after the initial crash, and got suited up and was told to go and start setting up a hard perimeter around the outside of the incident.
The people in the neighborhood where the planes went down are still in shock. What they saw and what they heard almost beyond comprehension.
There were, dozens of deputies, dozens of firefighters, investigators from the NTSB that pretty much converged on our neighborhood.
My name is Jerry Berry. I was with the LA County Sheriff's Department for 33 years. I was assigned to Lakewood Station close by and to Cerritos Station right here next to us. I had called into the station to get a report number, and they told me, "You need to get over to the city of Cerritos. There's been a plane crash."
We knew something big had happened in the neighborhood, but we didn't really understand the enormity of it. We didn't understand how big of a tragedy this was.
I remember just crowds of people. I smelled jet fuel, smoke, just the terrible odor, and the constant sirens coming.
It was a chaotic scene. There was debris all over the place.
One sheriff's deputy described the scene as pandemonium.
And as I got off the freeway and I got onto Carmenita and looked north, I'm just looking and go, what the heck? Oh my God, what is this? I see debris scattered all along Bloomfield. I see that one big jet engine that was embedded in the fence on the east side of the Carmenita Boulevard. And then my partner, he arrived in a different car, and we looked at each other and go, where do we start?
We were trying to establish what needed to be done.
We'll walk along and we see all kinds of pieces of things of the airplane. A tennis shoe with a foot in it, another foot with painted toenails, a lot of debris, and I believe I saw a hand.
I do remember seeing body parts. I remember seeing body parts kind of scattered around the neighborhood.
I saw a little kid's purse, a girl's purse of some sort. That part, that bothered me. But we had business to do and we took care of business.
It was such a big mid-air collision and such a big explosion that there was debris and body parts everywhere. And as a kid, I remember turning onto our street, Carnaby Street, and on the left-hand side, I remember seeing next to a small tree, the police tape that was kind of, you know, cordoned off this tree, and there was a body part. I distinctly remember seeing that as a young kid.
It was bad.
My parents remember the police officers knocking on our door and warning us, hey, don't let anyone jump your backyard, because my parents remember that there were reporters trying to get to the scene.
Let me ask you, what were you hoping to see in there?
Well, I wasn't hoping to see anything special, you know, just whatever's here to look at, you know, burnt houses and things.
And they were jumping over our backyard wall to get to the area because everything was blocked off.
We had looky-loos coming by wanting to get in, and they had the stations out and make a perimeter so we could keep people out of that. I had citizens come up and tell me they found body parts. They brought some to me in a baggie.
Police officers were telling us not to let looters get through our backyard because, you know, there were people who were actually stealing from the victims, stealing from the wreckage, and that was kind of crazy.
There were some people arrested for stealing from the dead. One of our officers from La Palma arrested 2.
They stole a lady's purse, and he got caught. He did go to jail. So we went back to 183rd and blocked everything off. We had to keep that clear for the investigation.
NTSB came in, all sorts of investigators, you know, trying to figure out exactly what happened.
Investigators worked beside medical examiners, collecting both aircraft debris and the human remains.
We were given instructions that nobody comes into the crime scene.
Our neighborhood was completely blocked off.
I had citizens and family members and stuff coming down the hill of 183rd there. We need to get in there, our family's in there. I'm so sorry, I can't let you in. And I really, really felt bad about that, but I could not let them into the crime scene.
In the days following the plane crash, there was obviously a very extensive investigation. And so we had to show our ID, or at least my father had to show his ID, and my mom too, to get in and out of the neighborhood because everything was blocked off still.
With sheriff's escorts, many returned home. Red Cross volunteers brought them food.
The barricades were up and I stood there and I checked ID, so more than likely I did speak with your father. I really have a heart for the people that were there, that lived there.
And we heard the plane noise getting louder and louder and louder until we knew that this was it. And my husband and I looked at each other and we knew we were going to die.
How many plane crashes has anybody been to? And how much devastation have you seen like this? You know, you hear people talk about, well, it looked like a war zone. This truly did look like a war zone.
I started screaming, oh my God, fear, death, I didn't know. I just know people were dead. I just know that the neighborhood was in a lot of trouble.
I'm not exactly sure if it was a medical thing or just a pilot error, but he actually collided with that airplane. And he shaved off the stabilizer, the big tail part, and that jet came straight down like a lawn dart. And the other airplane, it peeled the top of that like a tuna can.
It's unheard of. There's nothing that really compares to it, no matter how big or small of the disasters that I've covered as a journalist.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Authorities still are trying to determine just what happened when an airliner and a small plane collided over Southern California, killing all on board and an undetermined number in the neighborhood where the planes crashed.
As a kid, we would always sit as a family together to eat dinner, and we would always turn on the evening news. In the days following the air disaster, that was no different. Instead, we were kind of glued to the news all the time.
Channel 4 News, Weekend.
Patrick Healy is also out at the scene. He's with one of our minicam crews at the intersection, I believe, of Carmenita and 183. That's where the largest part of the Aeroméxico jet came crashing down. Patrick, please update us.
Bill, Colleen, actually, we're about 2 blocks away from there. It's difficult to find the words to describe the horror of the situation.
In fact, some of my colleagues, like Patrick Healy and Conan Nolan, they had just started at the station at the time. So I remember watching them reporting on the disaster in my neighborhood.
The people here weren't interested in numbers. Today they were interested in healing.
Every single station had it on TV. So we were flipping from station to station to station, just watching the news coverage that went on for a long time.
It happened at 11:56. As we say, we'll have full details as soon as we get them, including list of the dead and phone numbers for you to call if you think you had relatives on that flight.
You know, people often ask you, oh, you know, where'd you grow up? I grew up in Cerritos. And those who know Cerritos or familiar with Cerritos, then they'll say, oh, you know, what part? And we'll always say, yeah, do you remember the plane crash, as it's known? And then people say, oh, yeah, we remember the plane crash. And we tell them that was our neighborhood. For Carrie and her family, their answer is, well, that plane landed on our house.
We were really lucky because we went on our first American vacation.
So Labor Day weekend, they decided to go to Yellowstone.
We didn't want to be on Yellowstone. We smelled the sulfur of the geysers and stuff. Like, why does it smell like rotten eggs?
They didn't really like it. They were being dragged on this family vacation. That was sort of their first American vacation. They were coming back, and on the way back to Cerritos, they stopped by Las Vegas.
We went to Circus. It was a lot of fun. You know, we played all the games. Actually, my dad won me a little stuffed animal panda, and I remember my dad, like, we were watching the news in the hotel room, and he saw that there was a plane crash in Cerritos.
That search for bodies will likely continue throughout the daylight hours tomorrow.
And my dad didn't speak English very well at the time, and he kind of saw that, and he was like, oh, okay, that's interesting, but didn't realize it was our house. So when we drove back in a few days, it was police tape all around, and obviously it was, you know, a disaster zone. We couldn't get in, and we were all kind of confused. And finally somebody told them, okay, it landed on your house.
Their house was destroyed. They were the very last house closest to ours that the plane hit. In fact, there's a photo, I think it was in the Press Telegram at the time, that shows the main part of that Aeroméxico DC-9. It had crashed right in their backyard.
My dad had one friend from his childhood that moved to Cerritos and actually introduced us to Cerritos. He actually was the one that told us, don't go to Yellowstone, don't take the kids to Yellowstone, it's not going to be fun for them, and try to discourage us from going. And my dad was like, we're just gonna go anyways, like, this is our first trip, we're just gonna go.
It's kind of crazy. It's like, you know, they had to be kind of convinced to go on that first American vacation, and they're so glad they did because it actually saved their lives, right? They came back to nothing, and the only possession she had was really the clothes on her back and that panda bear stuffed animal that her father had won her at Circus.
That's pretty much the only thing I have left of that time. I still have it. I have it in my room.
As a kid, you don't really realize or understand just how big of a tragedy it was. Until much later that I realized there were more than 80 people who died in our neighborhood, just down the street.
Carrie Chan's house was the last one that was hit. They were very lucky.
I did talk to a firefighter, one that I believe Patrick Healy will tell you about, who told us that there was a party at one house, that all the people were there, that 7 people were living there, and they had guests. None of them were seen after the crash.
That's what was unique about this thing, is it hit that one house, they're having a pool party, the family together. I think there might have been one that was outside getting something, and he came back and his whole family's gone.
我跟他们讲，说不要怕，这个非常可怕的事情。OK， 我们很幸运 ，We are lucky，
the universe works in strange ways, and that we were really lucky that day. We were really lucky that my grandma was there to greet us when we returned home from Toys R Us.
Cerritos sounded quite a bit different today than it did 1 week ago. The sirens were gone, replaced by music and quiet prayer as 350 people took part in a memorial service at Cerritos Community College. They were remembering what they no doubt would rather forget, last Sunday's mid-air collision which sent a jetliner and a private plane plummeting into a Cerritos neighborhood.
Still feel very, very sad because think about those people just die at that moment. You know, it's very unlucky, right? But as Frank said, I was very impressed with the overwhelming effort, you know, by the rescue crew.
Well, we need to focus on the heroes.
I grabbed the kids and I went out to the front door, and I saw that house across the street from me just collapsed, just coming down.
The heroes that helped the child, that comforted the child, or the mother that is crying.
He told me, Mina, they're dead.
That's one thing you see at these big events. You know, I've been to a couple major, and it's like, wow, people do come together.
At a news conference today, NTSB spokesman John Lauber confirmed that the pilot of the DC-9 was warned of an unidentified aircraft dangerously close to him. But Lauber did not say whether the pilot ever acknowledged seeing the other aircraft.
About a minute and 15 seconds prior to impact, Los Angeles Approach Control contacted Aeroméxico 498.
The stories that came out as we were watching the news every night were remarkable to me.
What we're trying to do is match up the various impact marks on the horizontal stabilizer with the impact marks on the light aircraft, and from that we can possibly come up with an impact angle of how the two aircraft came together.
People come to the police, need trouble and help. When I became a pastor, I thought it'd be different. And the only difference is I don't carry a gun and I'm not arresting people, but you're still providing people at their wits' ends with help.
大难不死，必有后福. If you survive from a disaster, means you are blessed by Buddha, so you will have a peaceful life in the future.
Today's non-denominational service was the first of its kind for this community, and hopefully its last.
Imagine if it was a little bit different. Imagine if that Piper didn't clip the tail end of that DC-9. Imagine if it hit somewhere else. Imagine if that DC-9 carrying 58 passengers and 6 crew members, you know, kind of came into our neighborhood at an angle. It would have hit our home. It was just 6 or 7 houses away from ours.
I just hope the human tragedy will never happen again.
God's in charge, so you know what? I just smile and keep going. When He's done, He can take me home, and until then, I'm going to keep serving. Whether it's with a badge or a Bible, as I say.